Good evening and welcome to our Sunday evening study as we are looking at world religions and major cults, and we have now shifted from world religions to major cults, and tonight we're going to begin our study of Mormonism. And we're probably all familiar with Mormons in the sense that their missionaries have probably been around to our house. We see them riding bikes, dressed in white shirts and black ties with name tags that say elder so-and-so, or we have become familiar with Mormonism because of major figures in our culture who are Mormon. And so we need to understand this particular cult. And so as we begin here, we want to just give a brief introduction to cults and ask the question, what is a cult? What exactly is a cult? And let me just say right now that much of the information that I'm going to provide in this video comes from the book The Kingdom of the Cults by Walter Martin. Been edited by various people in various editions, but the basic text is that of Walter Martin, and the book again is The Kingdom of the Cults, and that's a resource that I think is valuable for every Christian to have, especially if they're interested in understanding the cults that are around and how we can best approach them with evangelistic conversations. And so let's take a look at this. Answer the question here, what is a cult? A cult might be defined as a group of people gathered about a specific person or persons' misinterpretation of the Bible. Now, in this definition, I want us to see three things. That when we're talking about a cult, that most often it's centered on a person, just a single person, or that person's belief. So even if the cult begins around a person and that person dies, usually the cult continues by focusing on that person's belief system. Also, it's not specifically clear in this definition, but one of the other things that signifies a cult or is characteristic of a cult is that it uses an established religion as a point of departure. So in the case of Mormonism, it uses Christianity as a point of departure. It uses Christian language and Christian ideas, and so it can be very confusing because when they use our terminology, we tend to think that they mean the same thing, but they don't. They mean something almost totally different than what we would mean. So their concept of a God, of who God is, or of Jesus is different. It's actually radically different than what Orthodox Christianity would say about God and about Christ. So the first thing that characterizes a cult is that it's focused on a person or their teachings. The second thing is that it uses established religion as a point of departure. It always comes out of what we would consider established religion like Christianity. And thirdly, it misinterprets, adds to, or changes the Bible. And so you look at the cults and you look at what they teach, and then you compare that with the Bible, and we see that they very often take extreme liberties with the Bible. They'll add to it. They add other works of authority to the Bible. And when you do that, you remove the authority of the Bible, or they change the Bible to fit their particular beliefs and the needs of their theology. And so when we're talking about cults, we're talking about a group that gets together that centers themselves on a person or a person's misinterpretation of the Bible, and it's a departure from an established, normalized religion. And so this is what Mormonism does. And so I want us to consider some fast facts about Mormonism. And there's 15 of them, so you might think that these aren't too fast, but I'm going to try to go through them pretty quickly here. So then the name of the church, the name of the Mormon Church, is officially the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Sometimes this is shortened just to Latter-day Saints or often we'll see LDS, the letters LDS, the acronym LDS, and that stands for Latter-day Saints or the Mormon Church. Now, we also need to understand that the Mormon Church isn't a monolithic whole. It does have several different sects. It's not just one complete thing, one entity. Most popularly, there's the Salt Lake City, Utah division and the Independence, Missouri division. And of course, the largest, most significant, and really the one that we're going to deal with in our study of Mormonism is the Salt Lake City Mormon Church. But the Missouri branch, the one that comes out of Independence, Missouri, actually has been recognized as the original church. And so that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. But we're going to deal with the Salt Lake City, Utah Mormon Church. It has a church membership of over 9 million. And at one time, they were adding over 300,000 converts to the church every year. Now, these weren't people who were born into the church. These were people who were converting to the church. 300,000 converts annually. That's what I would call significant church growth. And of course, that is going to raise a question that we're going to look at the end of this particular lesson about, why is this? Why are so many people attracted to Mormonism? Number 4, Mormons as a group of people are generally characterized by thriftiness, zealousness for their religion, and being missions-minded. And so having a missionary spirit, having a great desire to spread their beliefs and the beliefs of their church. And this leads to our 4th point of fast facts about their missionary zeal. Since World War II, they've sent over 50,000 missionaries out. And this is in large part due to the teaching of even their youngest children that it is their duty to serve as missionaries. So they teach even their very youngest that it is their duty to go as missionaries. But they don't just teach the young children. They also encourage their young people, their teenagers and college age people, that they need to do the same thing. So there is this overwhelming in the formative ages of children. So all the way from being very little, primary children, all the way up through college age, there is this push for missionary activity. And that's probably a lesson our church, the Protestant church, the evangelical church as a whole, can learn from the Mormons. Number 6, family. Mormons are often characterized by having large families. In fact, their birth rate is about twice that of the national average. And so Mormons tend to have a lot of kids in their family. They tend to emphasize health. It's sort of like they're treating their bodies like a temple. And not in the same way we would think of it with a Christian idea, but this is their body. They need to take care of it. And so they do things like they don't smoke, they don't drink alcohol or caffeinated drinks, and all these things that they would connect to health issues. So in general, they're healthy people. They want to take care of their physical body. Number 8, they tithe. They tithe 10% of their gross income. Now, not only is this tithing strongly encouraged, we could also say that it is enforced. So they're made to give this much. And one of the things that is true of churches, Christian churches, is that if everybody in a Christian church like ours, if they tithe, there would never be any budget issues. The church would have more than enough money. Their problem would be, what are we going to do with all this money? And so in the Mormon church, there is no real money issues. They are very giving people. Even if they give by compulsion, they're still giving people. Number 9, the 9th characteristic, is that the church is wealthy. The Mormon church in general is wealthy, just in their tithing income. So when you take their 9 million plus membership and you add in all their tithes, you bring them together, they're bringing in over $4 billion a year. That's quite a bit of money. They also bring in several $100,000 more dollars from the businesses that they own. And another thing that contributes to the wealth of the Mormon Church is that they have an investment portfolio of over $5 billion. They are heavily invested in various industries in our country and around the world. So the Mormon Church is a very wealthy church. They also are known for their education in general and religious education in particular. BYU, Brigham Young University, a Mormon school, has over 40,000 students. In addition to that, there's over 500,000 of their high school students and college-age young people who are enrolled in their seminaries or religious training institutes. So education's a big thing to them, not just what we would think of as secular education or liberal arts education, but also their own religious education. Huge emphasis there. They also look at their church as being a large family. So the church as family. And to help with this, they have this Mutual Improvement Association. This is for their young people. This would be like their youth group, their national youth group, where they teach their young people different things. They teach them sports, hobbies, drama, music, homemaking, dance. It's a way for their young people to get together and where they engender in them and teach them the values of the Mormon Church. And it's interesting too that often when these groups meet, whatever they're doing, whether it's sports, hobbies, whatever they happen to be doing, they often will sing a hymn and pray as part of the activity. It's an integral part of the activity, in fact. Now, also we know that the cultural impact of Mormonism is great. We have the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. I'm sure all of you have probably heard them. If you haven't heard them, after this video is over, you can Google them, and it's a wonderful choir as far as choirs go, and it's probably the most popular choir in the United States, if not the world. And so they are known for their choral music, and it's a huge choir. It's all volunteers who do that, and so they've had a huge cultural impact just through the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And then we reflect on their impact in government or their engagement with government, and they are active at all levels of government, from local levels all the way to even national levels of government. Mitt Romney, who's a senator and had at one time been a candidate for president of the United States, is a Mormon, and that's a national level office that he holds. So Mormons are very active in government. Their outlook on life is generally this: good works and clean living. Do good and live a clean life. So this is part of what they are known for. It's also part of why people find Mormonism so attractive, is because they treat people how they want to be treated. They live good lives, or what we would call good life. And Mormonism, a Mormon is probably a neighbor that all of us would appreciate having because of the way they live. Lastly, number 15 here, we need to understand too that Mormonism is exclusive. They believe that they are the only true Christians. So they're the only true Christians. Everybody else is divergent. Everybody else is wrong. They are it. And so they make an exclusive claim to being right about the truth in the world. So we need to recognize that they're not pluralistic. They're not syncretistic in the sense that everybody has a bit of truth. Everybody has a way to God. They would say only they know the way to God. And so let's just remember that as well. And so this is just some facts about Mormonism to sort of lay the groundwork for moving on in our study. The second thing we need to consider is the history of Mormonism. And I have 18 things here that I want to point out real quick about the history of Mormonism that will help us understand definitely where they come from, but also who they are. So, number one, the founder is Joseph Smith Jr. You probably already knew that. He was born in Vermont on December 23rd, 1805. And of course, him being a junior, his father was Joseph Smith Sr. And his father's an interesting character because he has a tremendous impact upon his son, but Joseph Smith Sr. was a mystic, and he would dig for imaginary treasure. He went all over, the Northeast there, Vermont, especially New York, and even down into Pennsylvania, looking for imaginary treasure, thinking that he had special signs from the spiritual world as to where treasure is, and he would go dig. And Junior, the founder of the church, he picked up on the practices and beliefs of his father, and he too became an infamous treasure seeker and a practicer of the occult. And he even continued to do this for some years after founding the Mormon church. Now, later on in life, as he got older and became an older man, he was criticized for these activities. And when he was criticized for these activities, he denied them. But it's a fact that he was a treasure seeker and a practicer of the occult. It's a well-established historical fact, even if he denied it. 1820 is a significant year because this is the year that Smith had his first vision, or at least that he claims he had his first vision, that in turn turned into a commissioning to restore the true church. So in this vision, God the Father and God the Son, now keep in mind that these are not the persons, God the Father and God the Son, that we find in the Bible. These are the persons in Smith's mind and his adapted and misinterpretation of the Bible. But he's using Christian language. These two persons, God the Father and God the Son, spoke to him and gave him a commission to restore the true church. And so from that, we understand that Smith, in his mind, believed that the true church was not in existence at that time, that there was a departure from the true church. In the decade of the 1820s, Smith will, even though after he has this vision to restore the true church, he continues his treasure seeking and occult practices that are associated with this activity. And it's important to note that at this time, many occult practices were illegal. There were laws about them. They were illegal to do. And there's a record of at least one court case where Smith was found guilty of money digging. And money digging was associated with occult practices. So we have court evidence that Smith was practicing occult things even after he has his first vision here in the 1820s. In 1823, specifically, the angel Moroni, and if you've ever seen a Mormon temple, there will be a steeple. I don't know what the proper name would be. There, this pointy thing at the end of the church that points up into the air, and on the top of that thing, there's a figure, a human-like figure. Well, this is the angel Moroni. And in 1823, this angel Moroni appears to Smith and introduces him to the golden plates. So he's just introduced to these golden plates. These plates would then become what we know as the Book of Mormon. But he's just introduced to them at this time. In 1826, Smith receives the golden plates. These plates were found on a hill very close to Palmyra, New York. And it is claimed that they were written in some type of Egyptian hieroglyphics. And Smith was able to translate these plates with what he calls the Urim and Thummim. So just like in the Old Testament, the high priest would have the Urim and Thummim in his breastplate. Smith said he had these same things, but they weren't stones like in the Old Testament. They were special glasses. And these special glasses were provided by the angel Moroni, so he could translate these plates, these golden plates, from Egyptian hieroglyphics into English. And this, of course, turned into the Book of Mormon. In the years 1827 through 29, we had the translation process where these golden plates are translated into Elizabethan English. Now, you don't need to be a literature scholar to know that at this time, in the 19th century, Elizabethan English was archaic. It was outdated. Nobody spoke that way even at that time. And so he is making his translation sound more authoritative, more King James-ish than it actually was. And it was during this time, this translation period, where Smith's father-in-law, Oliver Cowdery, Cowdery, he becomes involved. He sort of converts to what Smith is proclaiming here, and he's involved in the translation. And it's a very interesting process that's recorded about how they did this. We're not going to go into detail there. But both of these men were involved in the translation of these plates. And then on May 15th, 1829, John the Baptist, who is sent by Peter, James, and John, the apostles, came in person to Smith and Cowdery to bestow upon them the Aaronic priesthood and later the Melchizedekian priesthood. And so Smith claims all this stuff to be true. So just keep that in mind. This isn't what happened. This is what he claimed to have happened. And so he has this visit from John the Baptist on May 15th where he gets these priesthoods. Then in 1830, the Book of Mormon is published and copyrighted. So that's an important date, 1830, and it's in that same year, on April 6th, that the Mormon Church is officially founded. And Smith, with his brothers Hiram and Samuel, along with his father-in-law, Cowdery, and two other brothers with the last name of Whitmer, officially founded what they called then the Church of Christ. So that's the original name for the Mormon Church, the Church of Christ. It's later changed to the Church of Latter-day Saints in 1834, and then it moves on to be changed again to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1838. And so the name of the church changes there in its early years. But April 6, 1830, the Mormon Church is officially founded. Then, in June 9th of that year, they have the first conference, the first Mormon conference. It was about 30 men, and this is where their missionary efforts begin. And their first mission field was to the North American Indians. Now, when we talk about the beliefs of the church, this will be important because they don't choose these people just out of the air, just out of opportunity. There's a specific reason that they chose to go to the Indians in their first missionary efforts. Then in the late 1830s, or late 1830, the church moved to Kirtland, Ohio. And so that's important. They moved from the New York, Pennsylvania area, and they head to Kirtland, Ohio. And in a short 6 years, when they're in Ohio, their numbers rise to about 16,000. And so this is a dramatically growing church. They moved from a relatively small group of several thousand in the New York and Pennsylvania area. They moved to Ohio, and the church grows. It grows greatly to 16,000. And this tells us something about the just the worldview and the psychology of the people of America at that time. They were open for anything. They were searching for something of significance, and all of a sudden, Smith and Mormonism comes into that vacuum, and people start following them. Later on, excuse me, they moved from Ohio to Jackson County, Missouri. And when they moved to Jackson County, Missouri, they start to suffer persecution. People start saying, these people are not right, this is not right, even say they're crazy. But Smith and his group of people, the Mormons, they moved to Jackson County, Missouri. They purchased 63 acres, and Smith declares it holy ground. This is the spot where they will build the Temple of Zion. That's what they called it, the Temple of Zion, and it is to be the earthly headquarters of the church. And so they really intended to settle down there. And so now the Mormon Church has moved from New York and Pennsylvania to Ohio, and now they are in Missouri. And from 1831 to 1844, Smith claims to receive over 135 direct revelations from God. So God, his God, the God in his mind, speaks to him. This is what he claims. Now, this is not, of course, we know it's not true, but why would he do this? Well, it was undoubtedly an effort for him to protect his power and influence over the church. So if you're the only one who's receiving direct revelation from God, well, then everybody's got to listen to you. And so he's protecting his position. And one of these revelations that he received during these years is the revelation to institute polygamy. And so now the Mormon Church, and this decade of the 1830s into the early 1840s, starts to practice polygamy. And this, of course, isn't divine revelation that they can do this. This is so they can, the men of the church can fulfill their sexual desires. This great immorality that Smith, the church leaders, and now the Mormon Church as a whole have moved to practicing. And it's not until 1890 that polygamy is officially abolished as a doctrine, as a belief of the Mormon Church. And so the Mormon Church has officially abolished polygamy, but there are sects within the church that still practice it. They still have this immoral belief that polygamy is okay. Now, another thing we need to recognize about Smith is that he had a bad reputation. One of the glaring defects seen in the history of Mormonism is that there are no pro-Mormon statements or pro-Joseph Smith statements from people outside of the church who actually knew him. As a whole, those outside of the Mormon Church considered Smith to be an immoral man and of low character. So he had a bad reputation, and a reputation that was not unwarranted. He was a slippery character. He was not a good guy, as we would put it. And so he had a bad reputation. Then on June 27th of 1844, Smith is killed. Because of the persecution in Missouri that hasn't let up, the Mormons moved to Nauvoo, Illinois. And when they moved to Illinois, they grew and they prospered. But while in Carthage, Illinois, there were some things that happened, and Smith and his brother and some others ended up in the prison in Carthage. And it was while they were there that a vigilante mob stormed the jail where Smith and his brother Hiram were being held, and they murdered both of them. And so they ended up killing Smith. And really the only thing this did was turn Smith into a martyr. And so now you have a man who starts this cult And as he moves, people become more and more attached to him. His church is growing and growing and growing, but there starts to be persecution. And when these persecutors kill Smith, he simply becomes a martyr. Now everything he says is viewed as someone who was martyred for their beliefs, and it only elevates Smith in the sight of his followers. And it's after Smith's dead that they have a new leader, Brigham Young. Of course, this is the person that Brigham Young University is named after, but he eventually becomes the leader of the church. And in 1846, he moves the church from Illinois to the Valley of the Great Salt Lake, what would later become known as Salt Lake City, Utah. So they head west. They're trying to get away from persecution. They're trying to find an area where they can set up their own society to live how they want to live. And then Brigham Young's leadership, he rules the church for about 30 years as the infallible prophetic successor to Smith. So just as Smith was infallible and had these prophetic interactions with God where their God would give him direct revelation, this same thing happens with Brigham Young as well. Interestingly enough, Young and Smith, their decrees, their messages that they give are not always the same. They don't always agree with one another. And that's an interesting study in itself that we don't have time to get into, but if you get the book, The Kingdom of the Cults, you'll find there's huge sections in there that trace some of the differences between what Young says and what Joseph Smith had said. And one of the things to remember, we come to the end of the historical portion, and one of the things to remember is that Mormonism today is somewhat different than it was at its beginnings. And so they have evolved over time, and not everything they believed at the beginning is what they believe today. Polygamy is one of those things that sort of has evolved over time, where they didn't start out as polygamous, but they became polygamous, and now polygamy has been abolished in the mainline Mormon church. But we need to remember that they still hold to the basic tenets of their beliefs. So there's a basic set of beliefs from the beginning, even to now, that all Mormons hold to. And we're going to get into that next week a little bit as we look at the beliefs of the Mormons. We're talking about the theology of Mormonism next week. So let me end with a question. How could anyone believe in Mormonism with a history like that, where you have a fairly sketchy founder who none of his claims to, these visions and having these plates, none of these claims add up. The only thing that's verifiable historically is that he is not an honest guy. He is an immoral guy of low character. Everything else is just what he says. That's the only way that we know anything about the early religious accounts of Mormonism, is they come from Smith himself. It's what Smith said, and there's no verification that these things are true in any way. So how could anyone believe in Mormonism? And the reality is, at least in part, an answer to this question is that most Mormons and most people who convert to Mormonism don't know anything about the history of their cult. And even if they did know something about the history of Mormonism, the most egregious aspects of their history have been sanitized by church officials. Church officials have denied that Smiths did certain things. They denied that Mormons did certain things. For instance, Mormons slaughtered a group of immigrants to the West. They slaughtered them. Well, the church denied that, even though there is historical evidence for the truth of it. So a lot of the history of the Mormon church that would bring the church into question. It's been sanitized by the church officials. They deny it. They put a spin on it. And so even if people know about the history of the Mormon church, they're only getting the history that the official church wants them to see. But I still will ask the question, how can an intelligent people be convinced by such a story as this? How can they be convinced that Mormonism is true? And the reality is, most people who convert to Mormonism, they're not convinced by truth. They're convinced by what they view as a morally upright religion. These people live good and they live clean lives. When people look at the world and society around them and they see how it's degrading, they know it's not right, and they look at Mormonism and they say, this is an alternative. These people practice what they preach. And so it makes Mormonism very attractive. But most people are not convinced to be Mormon because of their history and doctrine. And they don't even look at those things as being all that important. And so how could intelligent people believe in Mormonism? They believe it because they want to believe it. They believe it because they see a need, and they see Mormonism as filling that need in some way. And so there are plenty of very intelligent people who are Mormons, but they never question the belief system that they are under. They never question the beliefs and history of Mormonism, which is in stark contrast to Christianity, because you can question Christianity. In our church, we can question the validity of the gospel message, and when we question it, we find its truth. We find that it is true, that it's historically verifiable, and that it actually works. It is actually true. And so you can't find this with Mormonism. And so that's just a brief fast facts, quick history of the Mormon church. We could go much more in depth in all those areas. And it is a fascinating study, and I would encourage you to do a little bit more study about it. And remember, we're studying Mormonism just like the world religions that we've studied previously, not so that we become experts in these things, but so that we have enough understanding of these things to know how to engage in fruitful evangelistic conversations with people who are Mormons. So our purpose here is really evangelistic and to help us in our evangelism. So let me give you a preview. Next week, we're going to consider some of the beliefs. We're going to consider the theology, at least some of the theology, the key points of the theology of Mormonism. And so hopefully you'll tune back in to this channel next Sunday evening. And so the Lord bless you as you continue to live for Him.